Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In a major attack against immigrant communities in the United States, the Trump administration's announced it's ending temporary protected status for up to 250,000 Salvadorans who've been living in the United States since at least 2001. The temporary protected status, known as TPS, gives the Salvadorans legal permission to live and work in the United States. It was enacted in 2001 after a devastating pair of earthquakes hit El Salvador. The announcement sparked immediate protests at the White House and a news conference in New York City. This is Salvadoran TPS recipient Arania Reyes speaking here in the city.
Le rogamos a nuestro presidente Trump. We
are begging to our President Trump and to the public to stand up and ask for our permanent, not temporary, legalization. We have been in the U.S. for more than 20 years, and they didn't give us any permanent status. I think we are honorable people. We do the work other people don't want to do.
Honorables, elegibles, sacamos el trabajo que otras personas no lo quieren hacer. Ganamos muy poco.
We earn very little money. We pay for housing and taxes and school for the children, for my 3 children, and they go to the school. And today I feel very sad because they want to take the TPS from us.
The Salvadorans will now have 18 months to leave the United States or find a legal way to remain in the U.S. The move will also affect nearly 200,000 children of Salvadoran parents who have TPS. These children are U.S. citizens. On Monday, many immigration advocates expressed concern the United States is planning to deport the Salvadorans back to a country gripped by violence and poverty, which has been exacerbated and fueled by decades of U.S. military and economic intervention in El Salvador and Central America. This is community organizer Sarah Ramirez speaking outside the protest at the White House.
Never will a physical wall stop migration, because the basis of our coming to this country is not because we thought it would be fun or because we just wanted to. It is because of situations in our countries that were historically provoked, not by us, that forced us to migrate.
Last year, the Trump administration announced it also is ending temporary protected status for tens of thousands of Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Sudanese immigrants living in the U.S. We'll have more on the Trump administration's TPS announcement after headlines. In more news on immigration, President Trump is meeting with Republican and Democratic lawmakers at the White House today to debate funding for Trump's border wall and the future of nearly 800,000 young undocumented immigrants known as Dreamers. Trump's demanding $33 billion over a decade to fund the expansion of the militarized border wall and to hire 10,000 additional immigration agents. In exchange, he's proposing Congress authorize protections for the undocumented young people who'd been protected under DACA. That's deferred action for childhood arrivals before Trump rescinded the Obama-era policy late last year. Immigrant rights groups and Democratic lawmakers have slammed Trump for trying to use the Dreamers in order to win his far-right anti-immigrant demands. White House Chief of Staff General John Kelly, formerly the Secretary of Homeland Security, and before that, head of SOUTHCOM, that's Southern Command, has been in charge of reaching out to lawmakers for the talks and will be at today's meeting. Over the weekend, while speaking at a press conference at Camp David, President Trump vowed there will be no resolution on DACA without billions of dollars in funding for the border wall.
We want the wall. The wall's going to happen or we're not going to have DACA.
In news from Washington, D.C., Special Counsel Robert Mueller is likely planning to interview President Trump as part of Mueller's investigation into whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia during the 2016 election. The New York Times reports Mueller told Trump's lawyers last month he'll probably seek to interview the president, although he has not yet sent a formal request for the interview. So far, Mueller has brought charges against 4 former Trump aides, including Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort, Trump campaign advisor Rick Gates, and Trump campaign foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos. Speculation about Oprah Winfrey potentially running for president in 2020 is continuing to build following Oprah's powerful Lifetime Achievement Award acceptance speech at the Golden Globes Sunday night. On Monday, a number of Democratic strategists came out endorsing or praising the idea. Meanwhile, President Trump's daughter and advisor, Ivanka Trump, also tweeted out a celebration of Oprah's Golden Globe speech and Hollywood's new Time's Up initiative to stop sexual harassment and violence. Ivanka tweeted, "Just saw Oprah's empowering and inspiring speech at last night's Golden Globes. Let's all come together, women and men, and say Time's Up, united." unquote. Ivanka's tweet sparked widespread criticism online, given her father, President Trump, has been accused of sexual harassment or assault or misconduct by at least 16 women. President Trump's nominee for Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services is slated to appear before the Senate Finance Committee for his confirmation hearing today. Alex Azar is a former executive of the multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly. President Trump nominated Azar to head the Health and Human Services Department after Trump's former pick, Dr. Tom Price, resigned from the position amidst a scandal over his use of military and private charter flights, which cost taxpayers up to $1 million. On Monday, Politico reported that when Alex Azar was a top executive at the drug company Eli Lilly, it tested the company's highly profitable erectile dysfunction drug Cialis on children in efforts to extend a multi-billion-dollar patent that was soon to expire. Critics say Azar helped the company game the patent system, testing a sex drug on children in order to extend Eli Lilly's profits. Officials from North and South Korea met today in the demilitarized zone for the first high-level talks in more than 2 years, amidst rising tensions on the Korean peninsula, largely sparked by President Trump's repeated threats to launch a nuclear strike against North Korea. During the meeting, North Korea said it would send a delegation of athletes, officials, and cheerleaders to the 2018 Winter Olympic Games in Pyeongchang, South Korea, in February. The two countries will also reinstate a military hotline that was suspended for nearly 2 years. In Tunisia, anti-austerity protests are spreading across the country after the government announced it's raising taxes and hiking fuel prices. At least one protester was killed and 5 others injured amidst a police crackdown against the protests Monday. The Tunisian Interior Ministry says the 55-year-old protester likely died after inhaling tear gas. In Turkey, the deputy prime minister has announced the state of emergency imposed after a July 2016 failed coup attempt will be extended for another 3 months.
The state of emergency will be extended again. As you know, as a procedure, the National Security Council needs to take an advisory decision, and then this must be discussed in the cabinet meeting. Probably this will be on the agenda during the next meeting of the National Security Council.
Activists say the Turkish government has used the failed military coup and the state of emergency to enact a far-reaching crackdown against dissidents, journalists, teachers, intellectuals, human rights activists, opposition lawmakers, and Kurdish communities in Turkey. Back in the United States, in an unexpected move, the Republican-controlled Federal Energy Regulatory Commission has rejected the Trump administration's proposal to bolster coal-fired and nuclear power plants. Trump has repeatedly promised to bolster coal production and the number of coal jobs in the United States, but his plan to do so, which was outlined last fall by Energy Secretary Rick Perry, has faced widespread opposition from not only environmentalists, but also a wide array of corporate interests, including Dow Chemical and Koch Industries. Multiple former Energy Commission chairs have also criticized the plan, saying it would raise electricity prices across the Northeast and Midwest. In Alabama, residents have raised more than $150,000 to support Tina Johnson, whose home was burned to the ground only months after she came forward to publicly accuse Alabama Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore of groping her without her consent back in 1991. The destruction of Johnson's home on January 3rd is being investigated as possible arson. Johnson says she suspects the fire is connected to her decision to come forward about her experiences with Roy Moore, who lost December's highly controversial special Senate election after at least 9 women, including Johnson, came forward to accuse him of sexually harassing or assaulting them when they were teenagers, one as young as 14 years old. In Washington, D.C., members of the LGBT community are speaking out about the brutal murder of a young African-American lesbian named Karis Lewis. The 23-year-old woman was shot and burned alive in the trunk of a car on December 28th in one of the final homicides of last year. After minimal media coverage of the possible hate crime, residents and activists took to Twitter using the hashtag #SayHerName to mourn the death of Karis Lewis. And in Harlem, Hundreds of people attended the funeral of anti-police brutality activist Erica Garner, who died at the age of 27 on December 30th after an asthma-induced heart attack 4 months after giving birth to her second child. Erica's father, Eric Garner, was killed when police officers in Staten Island wrestled him to the ground, applied a fatal chokehold in 2014. Inside the church last night, Erica was eulogized by the Reverend Al Sharpton, who talked about Erica's unflinching determination to get justice for her father. Sharpton said, while they say she died of a heart attack, no, her heart was attacked that day, referring to July 27, 2014, the day police killed her father. Sharpton went on to say justice is in a coma in the Eric Garner case. The police officer, Daniel Pantaleo, who put Garner in the fatal chokehold, still works in the NYPD. There have also been no federal civil rights charges brought against him and others responsible for Eric Garner's death. Also attending the funeral, hip-hop artist and actor Common, and the father of Michael Brown, killed by a white police officer in Ferguson, Missouri, 2 weeks after Eric Garner was killed in Staten Island. There was conflict in the midst of the funeral last night over the exclusion of Erica's grandmother, Eric Garner's mother, Gwen Carr, causing a number of people to leave, including a group of mothers of children killed by New York police, like Kadiatou Diallo, the mother of Amadou Diallo. A number of New York police officers escorted Erica's coffin out of the church. After the funeral, several dozen Black Lives Matter activists took to the streets. One person was arrested. Before they marched, I spoke to QB of Shut It Down NYC, a friend of Erica Garner.
Every Tuesday and Thursday, she would do a rally, whether it was 9 degrees, 10 degrees, whether it was 3 people, 4 people, we marched. We marched to her father's memorial. We said a few words, and that was something that just became a part of our lives. That's just a unique situation where you have to grow up in front of the world. It's like the world saw your father get murdered. The world watched your father not get justice, and then you're pushed into the limelight, and you're basically living a life that you didn't ask for. And she didn't ask to be an activist. It was kind of a choice that was made for her. She was demanding what we were all demanding, which is why Pantaleo to be fired, even though he's still collecting a salary.
The officer who put
That's the
her
officer
father
who ultimately killed her, who murdered her father, and he's still actively working with NYPD. There's no justice, and there still isn't justice. And just to have NYPD at her funeral, that's the last thing in this world that she would have wanted. To have NYPD come in the church, to be involved in the funeral. But one thing I want her to be remembered is how much she loved her children, because nobody's thinking about that. She just had a 3-month-old. She had an 8-year-old Alyssa. She loved those 2 kids. She loved them for the world. And I want people to just remember that, you know, she wanted justice, she never got it, and she died never getting it. But the fight is not over. It's not over.
What do we want? Justice! What do we want? Now! What do we want? Justice! What do we want? Now! If we don't get it, shut it down! Back.
We're standing right near the church where Eric Garner was just memorialized, and police are arresting one of the protesters outside.
Back up.
The man is still being paid who murdered Eric Garner. Please keep that in mind. That man is still on salary with the NYPD, and his daughter is now dead. Show some respect for the dead.
That's Valerie Ross, one of scores of protesters who took to the streets after the funeral of Erica Garner. She will be laid to rest today in Linden, New Jersey. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.